Hey, welcome back to Case Studies. I'm excited to share an interview with Steve Starks, the president and chief executive officer of LHM. Steve's a good friend. He is an inspiration to me, and I hope you enjoy it.
Good to be with everybody. It's an honor to follow Gail Miller, who's an incredible person. I've taken it 16 years of working for the Miller family, the Miller organization. I've never once gone home embarrassed for who I work for. In fact, I've always been incredibly proud. And you can see she's an incredible leader, and I'm proud to be associated with her organization. It's a privilege to be here today. I know that Steve Young is going to speak in a little while, and which is an honor because I grew up cheering for Steve Young. I feel a little bit like a different 49ers quarterback, though, and that would be Brock Purdy. Some of you may not have heard of him. That's why I feel like I'm Brock Purdy right now. I think he was the last person drafted in the last draft, and half of the 49ers team didn't even know he was on the roster, and then he ended up having to start. And so with today's lineup, I kind of feel like that's who I am in this midst. Incredible speakers. Congrats to Casey and Dave and the team at Sandlot. They're great partners of ours. We're grateful for our investment with them, multiple investments. And I'm really impressed by the tone and the spirit and the motive of this conference. I love coming down to Utah County, where there's been incredible wealth generation and entrepreneurship and the way that people want to give back. Just a quick story. When I was president of the Utah Jazz in 2015, I came into the role, and the naming rights agreement for the arena was about to expire. It had been with another company in Utah, Energy Solutions, that was rolling off. And so one of the first things that we had to do when I came in was to find a new naming rights partner. And we went through a comprehensive process, identifying potential companies, looking at those companies that we could align with. And a couple things became apparent through that process. Number one, you could tell who was really committed to not just building their own brand, but to the state. And the second thing you could tell was there was a celebration by some. All they wanted to do was talk about the exit. They just wanted to talk about valuations and exits. And as we went through the process, it became really apparent to us that we wanted a partner that was focused on more than the financial metrics or an exit. And so we had the opportunity to select Vivint and Todd Peterson and Alex Stunn and a bunch of other incredible people that we met, because it was apparent that they cared more than just about valuations and exits. They cared about having an impact. And in fact, one of the things they said that impressed us is that they wanted to set an example in Utah County that it wasn't just about those things, but it was about giving back to the community and being involved long-term and lifting. And I think that starting with those guys and continuing with many other examples, Utah County's become a powerhouse in the state. And it's not just about the exit. It's about giving back. It's about enriching. It's about lifting. And that's a great compliment to all of you that are from Utah County and the ecosystem that you've built here. Today, I want to talk about 3 stories, if I could. I'm going to briefly talk about my story. I don't want it to be too autobiographical. So I'm going to talk about the LHM 2.0 story. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Major League Baseball, because that's in the news lately, and I think there'll be some passion around that. I know that there is in our offices. I grew up between California and Utah. By the time that I was in 6th grade, our family had moved 5 different times. I'm grateful for my parents and for the home that I grew up in. We had a great family culture, but we didn't have a lot of means. We grew up in a situation where I felt like I was perpetually the new kid at school. This allowed me to learn to be flexible, to learn to be patient, and for all I knew, life was great growing up with 4 brothers, and truly it was. It was great because of the story of my mother, whose 70th birthday was last week. And just let me talk about my mom for a moment, Debbie. My mom was adopted in California, the only child in her family. She was raised by two good parents, but they struggled with alcoholism. When my mom was 14, her mom had been in the hospital dealing with the effects of alcoholism. And my mom was home one day by herself, and the phone rang, and the hospital asked for her grandmother. And my mom said, she's not here. And the woman on the other line said, will you tell her that her daughter just passed away? That was my mom's mom. And that's how she found out that her mom had passed away. Her dad, dealing with the effects of hard life, opted to leave for a while, and so her grandmother brought her in, moved her across town, and she raised her. My mom transferred schools, very rough neighborhood, and she fell on hard times. She ended up not finishing high school. She gave birth to my older brother, and after a few years divorced, found herself single in Los Angeles. No family to speak of, but a ton of grit and a ton of heart. Then one day she is a witness to a traffic accident, and the police officer who gets a witness statement from her is Officer Steve Starks, and finds her to be interesting, unique, gets her number. I don't think police can do that anymore, but they begin a relationship. And my dad, being from Utah, a returned missionary, falls in love with this woman from California who grew up in very different circumstances, and the two of them were married. I was born, 3 other brothers followed, and eventually the family made their way back to Utah. Now, I tell you about my mom because if there's anything good in my life, if there's any grit that I've developed or toughness, it's come from my mother. And I'm incredibly proud to be Debbie's son. And there's 5 boys that are really proud to be Debbie's sons. And so when we celebrated her 70th birthday last week and surrounded by grandkids and family, it was something that my mom never had growing up. But she lived for it and she hoped for it. And she discovered faith and she discovered things that she never could have comprehended. And each of us has a story, but our story doesn't start with us. Our story starts with the people that went before us and laid a foundation. My story now is unique. When we moved to Utah, I'm in 5th grade, and we moved a few more times, but eventually ended up calling the Ogden Valley home. I grew up in the beautiful environment of Huntsville, Utah. Great place to live and grow up. I went to Weber High School. I was a very mediocre student. I graduate from Weber High School having not taken the ACT exam with average grades. And in about June of that summer, I decided that I needed to go to college, and so I walked onto the campus of Weber State University. Weber State's where you apply, and if you don't get in, you come to BYU. It's up north. I like to call it the Weber State University. And I go to student services. I walk to admissions. There's this great guy there. I say, my name's Steve Starks. I would love to go to college. He said, great. Give me your transcripts. I said, I don't have them. Great. What'd you get on the test? I haven't taken it. And he kind of took a deep breath and looked at me, and he's like, it's okay. We're going to help this kid out. And he took me to the testing center, got me registered. I took the ACT, got my transcripts, and I started college. That's how it began. I do 2 semesters. I go on a mission to Mississippi. I come back, and I literally qualify for a Pell Grant. I enroll in Weber State. I get involved in campus. I end up, getting involved with student government and graduating, having a tremendous experience at the university. But I wouldn't have happened, literally, if I had caught the wrong person on the wrong day in admissions. The fact that he took time and personal touch to take me and help me through the process meant the world to me. And so it was a great honor a few years ago when we were in a position to set up a Starks Family Scholarship to help students, first-generation students, go to college. And it was full cycle to me because they made an investment in me and I could make an investment back. I graduate from college. I go to Washington, D.C. I interned on the Senate Judiciary Committee with the goal of going to law school. And after a few months, two things became apparent. I didn't want to live in DC and I didn't want to go to law school. So I came back, moved to Utah without a job, wasn't married, lived with my parents. And at this point in my life, I'm feeling like, man, all that college education and experience has led me here. I get the opportunity to have two job offers. One is to go manage the gubernatorial campaign for a gentleman named Nolan Karras. And the second one is to go work for a home building company called Destination Homes. I chose to go to work for Nolan Karras, and we ran for governor. We made it through the primary in 2004, or into the primary, and lost to John Huntsman Jr. I then went and helped Rob Bishop with the second congressional campaign. And in November of that year, I get a call from John Huntsman who asked me to come help manage his transition team. It was an honor because I was running the campaign with his Republican opponent. And the fact that John took that chance on me showed to me an abundant mentality. And so we helped run the transition. We built an incredible organization of people that were volunteers to help with the new administration. And then he asked me to stay on and continue some work that we were doing. We then approached business leaders to come and get involved in state government, help us operate more effectively, and the chair of our board became Larry Miller. So Larry and I have a chance to work together for 18 months in that capacity, and then I decide I'm going to go to business school. And we're heading to a meeting one day, and I take the opportunity with Larry to explain that I'll be transitioning out and going to business school, and asked if he would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. And Larry said, well, of course I would, but I'm going to try to talk you out of going to business school and to come to work for me instead. So, having enough of an IQ, I passed the test and said, I would love to come to work for you, Larry. And a few weeks later, started in that position. Now, when I started, I did not have a title. I didn't have a formal job. I was what Larry liked to call a special project. And it turns out over the years he hired a variety of special project people. And really for him that meant draft the best player available, don't worry about whether they play a specific position, and over time they'll learn the company and they'll be able to slide in where it makes the most sense. And then they'll rise or fall based on their own merits and work ethic, etc. So I joined the company. I'm working with Larry day in and day out. People are wondering who I am because he doesn't send out a formal notice, welcome Steve Starks to the company. In fact, after a couple of weeks, on a Friday at about 5:30, I said, hey, Larry, we've not talked about compensation. I didn't know if this was an unpaid internship or if this was a job. And Larry said, okay, that's great. What have you been making? And let's come up with a number. And so we did. It wasn't a negotiation. And I think that my starting salary was $72,000. No, it was $80,000. And then Larry looked at me and he said, go and on Monday tell the head of HR that you've been hired and this is how much you're making. You can imagine how that conversation went, introducing yourself and saying, here's my salary. But in that same conversation, Larry told me some advice that I think is very applicable to this group. He said, Steve, throughout the course of your career, you're going to make more money than $80,000 a year. But I want you to know that so long as you have enough money to fix the fridge when it breaks, to take your family on vacation once or twice a year, and have a little bit extra in savings, money will not bring you any more enjoyment than that level of happiness. It might create opportunity, but it won't bring you enjoyment. Larry passes away a couple years later. We have a leadership conference, and we have Arthur Brooks, the economist and best-selling author, come and speak. And Arthur Brooks wrote a book called Gross Domestic Happiness. And a bunch of economists gathered data, and they looked at the average salary where people are the happiest, $72,000. And I thought back to the conversation with Larry, and he was right, and he's proven to be right time and time again, that money is not a source of happiness. Money is an opportunity to do good, to lift others, to bless lives, to create opportunity. But if we pin our hopes and happiness on money, we'll be sorely disappointed. It's been said that wealth is like seawater. The more we consume, the more we want, but it never fills us up. If anything, that consumption can lead to a toxic behavior. So the virtuous cycle that Gail talked about is something that it's part of our culture. It's the fabric of our DNA, that we want to do good so that we can provide more opportunities for jobs, more opportunities to invest in great companies, and more opportunities for the foundation to contribute philanthropically. And so that virtuous cycle is a really powerful thing. It's not about the exit. It's about doing good. Throughout the course of my career, after starting in that position, I had a chance to hold a variety of roles. I oversaw some of our portfolio companies. I did mergers and acquisitions for a time, which I really enjoyed. And in all of those things, I learned the value of our reputation. And the Larry H. Miller signature is something that we take a lot of pride in. Because when Larry and Gail bought the Jazz, there was no business being able to afford to buy that. In fact, Larry told me one time that if he knew how to write a business plan, he would have run from the Jazz opportunity. But he signed his name on the line, and he gave his word, and he made it work. And not only that time, but time and time again, he and Gail delivered. And they stood by their name and their reputation. And I would watch as Larry would negotiate transactions. And the following conversation was not unusual. He would call the other party that we were negotiating with to buy a dealership or buy a business, and he would say, I'm looking at the attorney's most recent draft, and I'm seeing the red lines. Have you seen them yourself? And the person would often say, no, I haven't read it yet, or yes, I have. And Larry would say, I don't think that piece is very fair to you. Can we change that so it's more fair? Then we both would feel good about it. This is how I watch. This was my version of business school. Larry always said that when I walk down the street 10 years later, and if I cross that person, I want both of us to look each other in the eye and to both feel really good about what happened 10 years previous. It has to be a win-win situation. So that's what I grew up with, so to speak. And so when I did mergers and acquisitions, it was always that standard. That's how we did things. And what I found is that reputation opened doors. We once bought a dealership in Denver, Colorado. It turns out that the guy that sold it to us 20% less than a couple other offers he had because he knew that we would take care of his employees. The value of a reputation means more than you can ascribe to monetary number. And so the signature means a lot to who we are as a company, and we want to perpetuate and grow that platform that started with that single signature. 2015, I had a chance to become the president of Utah Jazz. I mentioned that. We did a naming rights deal with Vivint. We renovated the arena. We secured the NBA All-Star Game. We returned to playoff basketball, worked with incredible people. And we accomplished all of our goals except the goal of winning an NBA championship, which we're cheering Ryan and Ashley on to be able to get to the top of the mountain soon. And then in 2019, I became the CEO after a process with our board of directors. Gail talked about our governance. And a few months later, I'm with my family in St. George on March 16th. And our company at the time consisted really of the Jazz and our automotive dealerships. And our general manager, Dennis Lindsay, calls and says, hey, the team just took off for Oklahoma City. Rudy is sick. We're sure it's nothing, but we're going to be super cautious with him. The next morning he calls and says, he's still sick. We're going to be really careful and get the Oklahoma City Department of Health involved. Calls me later in the day. Hey, they've just swabbed him. They've done a test. We're going to wait the results. I'm going to call the NBA just so they're on alert. At about 6:40, my family's in the car and we're backing out to go to dinner. And Dennis calls again and says, Rudy just tested positive. He has COVID. Now, put yourself on March 16th, COVID was a thing, but it wasn't a thing, if you know what I mean. Like it was something across the ocean. And for the next 12 hours, the world changed, and we were under a microscope. I go inside, tell the family they're going to have to go to dinner without me. I turn the TV on, and the game is on ESPN, and they're holding the Jazz and the Thunder apart, and nobody knows what's going on. I call Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA. Rudy tested for COVID. He said, I heard, let's stay in touch. We're just figuring it out. Well, over the next 2 hours, the NBA season gets canceled. March Madness gets canceled. Venues across the country are shut down. And our world as we knew it changed. In fact, the next day I flew to Salt Lake. Our players, after a long ordeal, finally were able to get home. The state epidemiologist greets them on the plane and says, all of you are going to go home and stay in your house for 2 weeks. And then we'll be in touch with you and tell you what we can do. I go back to St. George to pick up my family. And the last public meal that we had in a restaurant was at Subway on the north end of Fillmore in a convenience store for 3 months. All of us experienced this, right? COVID had a big impact on our organization. It shut our theaters down, the arena, the jazz season. It shut dealerships down in several states. But more than that, what it did is it served as a catalyst for us to talk about the future. And because Gail had set up that governance structure, we had a board, our management team, the Miller family, and the board of directors really came together and talked about what we wanted the future to look like, and ultimately decided that we wanted a more diverse portfolio of businesses and investments. And so the decision was made to sell the Jazz, and then a year later to sell automotive, about $5 billion worth of transactions. At the same time, we invested in healthcare through a great senior health platform called Advanced Healthcare that's now growing nationally. And we've built up a real estate platform with the acquisition of Daybreak and other adjacent properties and projects that we're really excited about. We have a sports entertainment platform still because we kept the theaters, and then a great portfolio of businesses and investments. We recently acquired the majority stake of Swig. We've done other really exciting projects and investments, some of which you may not know of. But we really specialize in investing in family businesses that are looking for an exit. Given our DNA as a family business, our operational focus, and the preservation of values, we really feel like we have a unique opportunity, and that's proving to be true. Now, I mentioned that I had 2 job opportunities when I came back from DC. I want to tell you about the second one. You recall that I had a chance to go to work for Nolan Karras. The other opportunity was for a home building company, Destination Homes. Well, I stayed in touch with that company, and in 2020, the founder of that company, Brad Wilson, called me up and said, it's time to sell our business. And I would be honored if the Miller family and the Larich Miller Company would look at it. And we acquired that business a few months later. It was a full circle moment because in 2004, I could have gone to work for him. And now to have preserved a relationship and then be able to acquire that business and become a steward over it was a real honor, I think, for all of us, and it's a big part of who we are now as a company. But those are the type of businesses that we want to invest in. A family business that may not have a transition plan or looking for an exit, and where we can become stewards of that business. That's where we specialize. Now, everybody's moving down the tracks with that strategy. Everybody's excited about it, and the business is moving forward. We feel our best days are ahead of us. And supplementing that is a conversation that took place almost 12 months ago when we were in New York. And I'm going to wrap up by talking about Major League Baseball. We were in New York and had a chance to meet with the commissioner of MLB. And we said that we were evaluating options to potentially build a new stadium for the Bees. And then took the opportunity and said, this was like another elevator moment, asking for a letter of recommendation, but just said, hey, Commissioner, we really think that Salt Lake should be on your list of expansion markets. And he said, oh yeah, tell me about that. And so I gave my best Chamber of Commerce speech about Utah, talked about how great we are as a state and a market. And he said, you know what, you are on our list. And I'm going to have my team talk to you afterwards. And then he kind of gave us the map. He said, well, here's how I'm thinking about it. I want to expand by 2 teams by the time I retire. I've really got to get Tampa, and I've really got to get Oakland resolved. But after that, I would like to add a team to the east, a team to the west. And here's kind of what the landscape is. Well, we left that meeting really encouraged by our prospects. And over the past year have quietly been building out a coalition and evaluating the prospects of Major League Baseball, what that would look like. Are we competitive as a market? Where would we build a stadium? Does the Miller family want to get back into professional sports? Would we lead an investment? And so months and months of those conversations, and then we started picking up the phone and calling people. And what we found out was whether it was the Huntsman family or the Eccles family or the Marriott family, there was universal excitement about the prospect of bringing baseball to the market. We talked to the governor, we talked to the mayors of Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County, we talked to our federal delegation, Senator Romney, and everybody was enthusiastic about the prospect. And so then we said, let's not just announce this, let's announce it in a way that would make everybody proud and demonstrate to Major League Baseball that we are Major League ready. So we built a website. We have swag that you can buy. We announced a coalition. We identified a place on North Temple with 100 acres that would be an ideal site for a mixed-use development anchored by a Major League Baseball stadium. And on last Wednesday, we announced to the world that Salt Lake City's open for business for Major League Baseball and that we would like to be considered as an expansion market. And the response has been really, really exciting. So we're going for it. We believe we're on deck. We believe that Salt Lake, and by extension, the greater Wasatch Front, is a major league market. We love our prospects for it. Join our coalition. We need your help. Go to bigleagueutah.com. Sign up. Buy hats. All of the money's going to go back into the cause. Go invest in Little League baseball and softball. We want to raise the profile of baseball in our state and be ready for this. And we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't believe that we had a real shot at it. And so we're going to give it everything we have. And just in closing, when we talk about stories, Gail talked about raising her family around the baseball diamond with Larry playing softball. I can't think of a better way for Gail to cap off her incredible legacy than by coming full circle and helping bring Major League Baseball to Utah. So let's make it happen. Thank you very much.